Hi everyone, welcome to this short video where I'm going to say a little bit about my book, Using R as a GIS. So this is an introductory book, it's a beginner's guide to mapping and spatial analysis. So no prior knowledge of R or GIS is needed. We split the book up into 5 parts. So we start off with part 1, looking at the basics of GIS and spatial data. So we talk a bit about what R is and how it works as a piece of software and how it works with RStudio. We talk a little bit about how we think about spatial data and what GIS is, how we store spatial data in terms of spatial data file formats and data types, and also mention a little bit about scale. And then in chapter 3, we look at some basics of how do we actually do some maps in R. So how do we read stuff in? How do we load the spatial data libraries? And then how do we map a shapefile? Part 2, we build on this with some more advanced maps, making use of some of the TMap library and raster and vector data. So we talk about how we do choropleth maps using vector data, how we map raster data, a little bit on interactive maps, and then also I give a bit of background to the different types of spatial libraries that we have, so SF and SP. Part 3 gives us some more advanced concepts. So we apply some of the GIS techniques to more advanced programming concepts in R. So this is really useful. These things like loops that allow us to create multiple maps quickly and easily, if and if else functions, and your own functions as well, if you want to get a bit more advanced. And we also talk a bit about spatial data wrangling. So how do you get spatial data into the form you want, both using vector data and raster data. We also talk a little bit about how we work with the dplyr and the tidyverse libraries as well. Part 4, we talk a little bit about project management. So how do we take all the work that we're doing, but make sure we've got it well organized, we can find the files we want, and so on, both when just you're working with yourself or working as part of a team. We also talk a little about version control, so using Git and GitHub and what the differences are and how we deal with pull requests and all that kind of stuff. We also talk a little bit about projects in RStudio, how they can be useful to help manage some of this stuff. And then lastly, we talk a little bit about R Markdown and Quarto. So how do we work with those and why they might be useful. The last part is part 5. So next steps. So where do you go from here? So finding your own data. So working with spatial data on your own projects. Where do you get that from? What do you need to think about? And then when you get problems, I guarantee everyone will get stuck at some point, but how do you deal with that? What are the resources you can pull on to help deal with that? A little bit about TMAP version 4, which is coming out shortly, and some stuff about dplyr and ggplot and various other resources. So both electronic ones and books, and mention very briefly Python, and a little bit about training courses as well. So that's a very quick overview of using R as a GIS. I'm Dr. Nick Beerman. So please have a look at the website. You can buy a PDF copy or a print copy through Locate Press. We have scripts for all of the R work that we do in the book on the website. Please do like and subscribe to the video and comment. Let me know how you get on. Thank you very much.